Thank goodness that the mouse took us away from text-only computing, where we had to know how to do everything on a keyboard, and if we didn't do it just right, the whole thing didn't work. But that doesn't mean that we don't need keyboards. As a matter of fact, we need them more than ever. Keyboards are so integrated that I even have a keyboard integrated onto my cell phone. But let's get back to PCs. What I know about the PC is that there are a lot of things that you need a keyboard to do. Of course, that would include things like typing an email, but it also includes things like running the operating system or listening to music files. So the keyboard, like the mouse, is an integral part of any PC system. In this chapter, we want to take a look at the different types of keyboards, how they're connected to the computer, as well as some settings, and we'll also identify what some of those keys are beyond the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. When you get all finished, if you were comfortable with the typewriter, you'll be comfortable with the keyboard. And if you've seen a keyboard before, maybe you'll know what some of those buttons do that you always wondered about. Now, when I ask a question like, what is the keyboard? Sometimes people give me that look like, well, that one we might be able to figure out. But remember, we're trying to tie together concepts here. So let's again start with the basics. First of all, a keyboard is hardware. And second of all, it's also an input device. Now we can take a little bit further than that. The keyboard can do several things, including controlling the cursor and movement of the screen. It also can launch and execute some computer functions. It can obviously enter text, numbers, and symbols, and that's primarily what we think about it doing. And it may even have a 10 keypad for doing mathematical entries. If you do any type of accounting, you happen to be working with a spreadsheet, trying to balance your checkbook, things like that, sometimes using the 10 keypad can be easier than using the numbers that run across the top of the keyboard. It may also have any variety of special function keys. Now, I need to kind of clarify that. There are function keys. They're the ones that begin with an F, F1, F2, F3, F4, that usually run across the top of a keyboard. Here, I'm talking actually about special function keys, not function keys. Now, I'm kind of laughing when I say that because that can be really confusing. Some keyboards these days, for example, are multimedia. So there may be keys that actually work with the volume, turning the volume of music up and down, or pausing a track that you're playing. Those are the kinds of special functions I'm talking about, not the function keys themselves. We don't have quite as many variations in keyboards as we do with mice, but we do have some variations, so let's talk about different types of keyboard devices. First of all, we do have the typical or standard keyboard. There's the traditional layout, which can be very simple and very similar to a typewriter if you're used to using a typewriter. The very first keyboard that we see on the very left here is a traditional keyboard. In the past decade or so, we've also seen the introduction of things called ergonomic keyboards. The two keyboards on the right, the black one and the putty-colored one on the upper right, are ergonomic keyboards. What they do here is they take a typical keyboard layout and they kind of angle it and split it so that your hands rest more naturally. What we know about typing, if you do a lot of it for many hours in a week, is that it can start to wear on your hands, and we don't want that. So for health purposes, an ergonomic keyboard may be a little bit better and healthier for you. Then we can get into a whole variety of what are known as touch keyboards. One type of touch that we have is actual handwriting recognition. If you have a graphics tablet or a tablet PC, you may be able to use a stylus and actually write. And the computer can interpret you writing ABC and actually type the letters ABC. Many devices these days, including some actual computers, actually have touch screens. You may have experienced these when you go to an ATM, or if you work in a restaurant or a bar, or even when you check in at the kiosk at the airport. In these places, you might actually press your finger on the screen to make selections if the screen is touch sensitive. This is a special type of keyboard entry as well. Not because it's actually necessarily ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, but simply replacing what you normally would type on a keyboard by touching the screen itself. Even though it's a little bit beyond the realm of what we're talking about, I do want to introduce you to the fact that many computers these days are called voice-enabled, which means instead of having to type on a keyboard, I actually can do the equivalent of dictating. Now, if you think way back in time to maybe the 70s or 80s, you used to have a secretary who would come in for dictation. And his or her boss would say, "Take this down." And they'd say, "Dear John, please accept this as my approval," so on and so forth, and that person would write it down. Today, computers can do this as well, especially in a word processor. It can follow my voice, and I use specific commands. For example, I could say, "Dear John, comma, new paragraph," and it would type it exactly the way I said it. As far as the operating system goes, I also can do some voice-operated commands there as well, by simply saying things like Control, Alt, or Enter. So the typical keyboard, all the way back to the traditional keyboards that we've seen for many years, coming all the way down through some of the new things that we have, are all input devices and ways of entering text and numbers into the computer system. Since keyboards are hardware, they have to have some kind of connection to the CPU, and these connections are very similar to those you would use for a mouse. If you have a wired keyboard, it's either going to go into a keyboard port or a USB port. If you have a wireless keyboard, it's going to have a receiver that's attached to a USB port. And of course, a special type of wireless these days is Bluetooth, which again is very similar to wireless, just a specific technology. It's also important to mention here that sometimes you get a wireless keyboard and mouse combination. If this is true, then you'll have a wireless mouse and a wireless keyboard, but you may have only one receiver that actually connects to the USB port of your computer. So that means you'll have a total of 3 pieces: one receiver, one keyboard, and one mouse. Often, though, we also can buy them separately and have just a wireless mouse or just a wireless keyboard. When we discuss the newer generations, though, we also have to talk about integrated keyboards. I'll show you an example of an on-screen keyboard that we can use with Windows. But remember that sometimes the keyboard or keyboard functionality can actually be part of the computer case, like in a laptop or a cell phone, or it can be part of the screen itself, like as in a touch device. I think as you begin to learn about all of these things, you're going to start seeing them more and more out in society where you just may not have noticed them before. So when we talk about keyboards, we get back to the basics. It's a hardware input device that can have many different types, configurations, and connections, but they all basically do the same by providing